Okay, so maybe I will make like this. So we will continue our the discussion and about France, because now France is there are two things very important for the world, I think. Firstly, it is the very big demonstration which are taking place in France against Macron. And also the left are starting organizing the electional campaign to the election in the president, which will take in place in April 2022. And it is important for the Polish perspective that in Poland, for example, when there are elections, there are only the candidates from the right, from the nationalists, or in France we have many leftist candidates, and it is, I think, that something which we have to propagate, that it is good information.
Yeah. So what?
So say something about why we have this demonstration and why they are so massive.
We had yesterday and last week very strong manifestation against different things, in fact. And it's important to understand, because first of all, we have to remember that we had the very strong movement of the Yellow Vest that was strongly repressed by the government, and that there are a lot of people which are against the government since that time, and they take the street all the time they can, as they did this week. That's the first thing. And of course, the Yellow Vest movement was mostly a movement concentrating on social issues. That's the first thing. The second thing is the fact that all the Western countries, all the capitalist countries, but especially the French government, was completely, at least in appearing, to have a complete mess when concerning the coronavirus policy. I'm not thinking that they were badly organized. I think that they wanted to make the society fearing the situation and to be unconscious of the real aims of the government, which was to help big pharmaceutical multinational enterprises to make profit. But the appearance for the people was that the government is telling something white one day, and the next day they are telling something black, and they don't know what they want, and they don't know, they don't control the situation on the health front. But from my point of view, they controlled the situation. They just wanted people to be concentrated on false things, so they can carry on their reforms, their very reactionary reforms, especially on the health system, against the health system, against the public health system, and in the same time to carry on reforms on pension, on unemployment, making people concentrate on the COVID situation and creating new problems all the times with these lockdowns and so on, so that people cannot see what is happening behind the scene. That's my point of view. So at the very end, it means already it's 1 year and a half. People did understand that this regime doesn't work for their interest. They don't really understand the whole logic of the regime policy, but they understand there is something very wrong with that regime, and there is a lot of miscontent about concerning that. And in this situation, we have the issues of vaccine. I will not, of course, talk about vaccine in a long development, since I'm not a scientist, I'm not a chemist, I'm not a pharmaceutical specialist, and I'm not a doctor. But what we can observe, of course, and people did observe that, is that the vaccine that are pushed in European Union, and especially in France, are all Western vaccine belonging to very big industries. And in the same time, they didn't accept the Russian, the Chinese, or the Cuban vaccine. And people understand that there is something wrong in it, because why they accept some vaccine and they don't accept other vaccine, especially because since the Western Pfizer and other vaccine are based on a new technology, which is not very experimented, at the same time that the other vaccine in the other part of the world are on much more traditional vaccine technologies and are not accepted. And this, of course, creates the feeling that they are trying to push something which is in the interest of the big multinational capitalist firms, that's for sure. That's no doubt about that. But maybe they are also trying to make experimentation on people, and that's why you have anti-vaccine movement, which is based on the feeling. I say on the feeling because it's difficult to think about that rationally, but on the feeling that there is something which is not clear about those vaccines, not all vaccines, but those vaccines. That's one thing. But what is the aim of the government in this situation is to make people divide. They want to have the society divide. They did it, of course, before the COVID situation, when the yellow vest appeared, for example, and their strategy to divide the population. And they wanted to divide people between pro-vaccine and anti-vaccine. And they failed. They failed. Why? Because when they imposed this very strict law, which is trying to force people to be vaccinated, of course, you had the reaction of the right wings and extreme rights, with, let's say, more or less conspiracy theories, which were trying to lead the movement against vaccines. But in fact, very quickly, it appeared spontaneously, and later on the left side of the political spectrum, that a lot of people were fighting against the government decision, not on the line, I am pro-vaccine or I am anti-vaccine, like the extreme right is trying to do, but I am fighting against the repression of liberties, because people have the right to know if they want to have vaccine. They have the right to know what is in this vaccine. They have the right to know why the Russian or the Chinese or the Cuban vaccine are not accepted, and only the American and European, Western European vaccine are accepted, and so on and so on. And that in the same time, when they push this law, which will control the people if they are or not vaccinated. In the same time, they are pushing laws reforming, so-called reforming the hospital, pushing laws reforming pensions, reforming unemployment laws, with pushing them in the summer behind the scene of the vaccine, anti-vaccine question. And that's why now we have a strong people in the streets. Of course, people in the street can come from with some, let's say, far-right ideas, but most people come in the street for very different reasons, because they understand the government and the authorities is manipulating them and lying. And that's why left movement, trade unions, part of trade unions, part of the left movement joined and the manifestation. As they say, they are not against vaccine as a tool to make situation improving. They are fighting against the fact that the government is imposing vaccination in a situation where people don't believe in the government. They are against the fact that they are pushing vaccine of which are the most costful for public health system, and they don't accept much less expensive vaccine coming from other countries. They are in fact fighting for capitalist interest under the impression that they are fighting for public health, and they are pushing laws, antisocial laws, behind the scene. In the same time, they are pushing the division of the society in pro and anti-vaccine. And that's why the people took the street mostly. They understand that this government is a bunch of liars, which are trying to manipulate them and to create false problems, false issue, or at least falsified issues. And behind the scene, they are pushing other things. And people understood that the aim of the government is to divide society. And that's why you have people who manifest against the government, who are for the vaccines, and people who are against the vaccine. People doubting about vaccines, and people already vaccinated but who manifest for the liberties, because in fact the situation the government decided is against liberties, because now of course you will have to be vaccinated if you want to go to shop, if you want to go to the train, if you want to go to theater, to cinema, to restaurants, and so on. So you will have two types of French people: the one who are having a, let's say, normal life, and people who have no normal life. And in this situation, a lot of people on the left have the impression that the government is just trying to divide people, and that tomorrow they will use the same tool to divide people about people having good thoughts and bad thoughts, official thoughts and unofficial thoughts, opposition, not opposition, and people are feeling that there is a danger to go toward a dictatorship, open dictatorship, under the appearance of a vaccine situation. I hope I was clear about explaining what are the complicated issue we are facing now.
Yes. So for me, it is a very complicated question. And I think that things which you said, for example, about the vaccine from China, I never heard about this in the demonstrations. So that the things which I heard, that the Macron, why we hate Macron? We hate Macron because Macron, he make things like in China, that in China we have the politic of the vaccination, so China are bad, and we hate Macron because he is like a Chinese.
That's the point. That's what the official media want people to know, but it's propaganda. Because if you go and you ask people on the street, or if you ask political leaders supporting manifestation, you will understand it's not that point. It's not that. It's much more complicated than that. But in the media, they never invite.
No. But I am not saying about the bourgeois media. I am saying about the YouTube or social media where you can find the people who are um, in this movement.
Yeah, but
So
you have also in social media people having other opinion. But it depends
yes.
which social media you are looking at.
Okay. So, but the question is, firstly, uh, what is the position? What Marxists have to have a position towards the extreme right conspiracy theories, which are, in my opinion, very dangerous. When we see this movement, which is in USA, the extreme right who supported Trump, and there are very many of the psychopaths, which are one of the most important base of this extreme right conspiracy theories is anti-communism.
Yes, of
Uh,
course. Of course.
they say they think something, and always they think this is like in communist state, this is like the socialism. Now we are this is obligation of vaccination, it is bad because this is socialism. This is this argumentation,
It's
and
the same argumentation we had with the yellow vest at the beginning, if you remember. That the yellow vest, they are fascists, they are nationalists, they are extreme right. Don't go with the yellow vest because that's the direction is let's say like Trump in the United States, and that's what the power and the leading force want to have. But whatever I think, I can criticize, let's say, Mélenchon or the Communist Party and the CGT for a lot of reasons, but they are in part of the manifestation now. And you cannot you can criticize Mélenchon or Communist Party of France or CGT trade union for a lot of things, but you cannot tell that they are extreme right.
No. You say it is there are the people who, in the time of the starting of the election, they want to be avec other people, and for example, I wanted to speak about this later, but I can give one example of Anas Kazip. He's a young trade union organizer, which is in Trotsky's organization Revolution Permanente, and he present himself to the election president in 2022, and he made a discourse about this demonstration. He said, we socialists, we support vaccination. The vaccination was very good solution to destroy many things. So 19% of his conversation, he said vaccination is good, obligation of vaccination is good, but after but because I hate Macron and because in France blah, 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 we are in this movement. I don't understand why.
I didn't hear him, so I cannot take position on what he said. But I know what are, for example, telling people from the La France Insoumise movement, which is very clear. I mean, they criticize the way the government managed or didn't manage the COVID crisis. They criticized the government for having decided some vaccine and expelled others. They criticized the government because the vaccine are very, they choose the most costly vaccines. But in the same time, they say that they are not against the vaccination, but that they understand why a lot of people do not believe in vaccine, because the government failed and lied so many times that people are not believing in the government. And we have to be with the people in the street, because to explain them the manipulation from the government. And I think this point of view is correct. That a lot of people, a mass of people, are completely disoriented, and you cannot make disoriented people change their opinion if you are not with them, because they are disoriented for good reason. They are not disoriented because of conspiracy theorists. They are disoriented because the government lied. Because the authorities are pushing capitalist reactionary reforms, and the extreme right is trying to take them on their side, but they don't really succeed in it, because yesterday's manifestation, you had the extreme right. The extreme right manifestation was not very powerful. The mass manifestation was not the extreme right one. It was the manifestations of normal people, not led by the extreme right. The extreme right with Philippot and other leaders, but especially Philippot, was little manifestation, and you had two manifestations. It is important to show there were two manifestations. There was the little one was the extreme right manifestation, and the massive one was the, let's say, non-political manifestation in which the left was taking part.
Okay, what do you think about Russia? That in Russia we have the part of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, which they also made a demonstration against vaccination, but the vaccine which is in Russia is better, as you said earlier.
I think it's better. I'm not a physician, so I will not take part of the discussion. What I regret, but it's logical that it was not done, is that in the media you have no real debates between scientists. Normally, about vaccine, you should have only scientists invited, representing different tendencies, because in science you have no monolithism. It's normal. Science is always beginning every process with discussion between scientists and polemics between scientists. Science is that. I mean, science is not a religion. Science is first of all different theories opposing themselves, and at the very end the experience shows which one was good and which was wrong. And what we can observe is that there was no real scientific discussion in France, in French media, in Western media, but to a certain extent is the same in Russia. I mean, of course, we have another point of view concerning Russia because of international relations, strategy, and so on. But basically, we have to take into account that Russia is also a capitalist country, is also a country linked with the interest of the bourgeoisie, of the Russian bourgeoisie, of course, not the Western one, but still the bourgeoisie. And that even if the Russian vaccine looked better than the Western one, you should have in Russia also a scientific discussion in public medias between scientists that are supporting the Russian vaccine, with scientists that are not supporting the Russian vaccine, with scientists that are supporting other vaccine, Cuban, Chinese, Pfizer, whatever they want. You should have that, and you didn't have that in Russia too, because in Russia they are pushing their own Russian vaccine. I think, but it's a belief. It's not a scientific deduction, because I'm not a scientist. I think, I believe better that the Russian vaccine is better than the Western, but I'm not sure, and I cannot tell it's better. I think I would have liked that in France we would have all vaccine possible, and we would have a big scientific discussion between scientists giving their opinion about Pfizer, about AstraZeneca, about Russian vaccine, about Cuban vaccine, about Chinese vaccine. If we had a rationally governed country, that would be the situation. But we had not this situation in Western country. But we had not this situation in Russia too. And that's the reason why the Communist Party of Russia, I think, is showing that, the Russian regime is not entirely logical and rationally functioning. It's also a capitalist regime. Maybe we prefer the capitalism of Russia being in the West, than the Western capitalism. But if I was in Moscow, I would say I would be very anti-Putin on the internal situation, even if I support him in a lot of international issues, but definitely not on social and internal issues in Russia, because Russian policies, internal Russian policies, are completely reactionary. They are just as reactionary as the Western policies, the Western capitalist policies, and we have to take that into account. I mean, in former Soviet Union, we have only one country with a relatively progressive social system. It's Belarus. It's not Russia.
Okay, but I want to ask you about the division the world for the imperialist countries and the third world countries, where we can see the difference in the question of vaccination, that this vaccination is much more faster in the rich imperialist countries than in the poor countries in the third world. And the biggest difference we can see in the Israel, when in one side we have the citizens of Israel which are vaccinated in I think 19% or something like this, and in the people who lived in Gaza, they are not vaccinated, and these people who are in third world countries now, which are devastating by the coronavirus, right? Brazil, for example, or they go out for the street and they criticize their government, bourgeois government. We want the vaccination. We want that the vaccine are free. Not paid,
for free,
And now we have demonstration in third world countries. The poor people who won't be vaccinated, and the people from the imperialist countries who are demonstrate because they don't want to be vaccinated.
Yes, but it's not exactly that. But as I told you, in France, vaccinated people are also in the street with non-vaccinated people against the government. So it's not a manifestation for or against vaccine. It's a manifestation against the way the government push vaccination. In the third world countries, it depends also on the countries, because of course Brazil is a good example, is one of the good example of a situation which cannot be tolerated. But we have other situation in different other countries. For example, we have no manifestation in Venezuela or Nicaragua. Why we have no manifestation in Venezuela and Nicaragua? Because the health system is organized in Nicaragua and Venezuela, so to make people not to be protected even before the vaccination, they are cared by the health system. So the panic is not so strong in Venezuela or Nicaragua like it is in Colombia or Brazil or other Latin American countries. But we have a situation also which is completely, for example, strange. Such reactionary country like Morocco. Because of course we know Morocco is supporting the Western imperialism and so on and linked with Israel and everything. But still, in Morocco, people have the right to choose which vaccine they want. They have the Chinese vaccine and they have the Pfizer vaccine. So Morocco has a much better situation than France, for example. And you have no manifestation. You have criticized in Morocco for different things against the government, but you have no manifestation in Morocco against vaccination because people in Morocco can choose the vaccine they want. And they feel that on this field, and I have to recognize it, even if I don't like the King of Morocco, but on this field, the King of Morocco was right. And he carried on a policy which is rational, which is taking into account the interest of its people, even if on other things he's a complete reactionary and a bad leader. On this field, he's much more progressive than, of course, Bolsonaro in Brazil or Macron in France.
Okay. I want also ask you about one thing which is for me interesting, important. It is this philosophical difference between the socialism and the libertarianism. That socialism, it is a ideology which said that collective, the society, is more important than the individual freedom of somebody who say that I want to be I want to be free. Yes, and I am not agree with the decision of the majority. I am not agree with something which is, and I think that the socialists have to promote the always the collective and this argument. Because what is the problem of the speech of Macron? That Macron in his speech, he many times used, in my opinion, leftist propaganda. He said that we need to care about the oldest people. We don't have to be egoist. We need to think about the collective. And this is my ideas that when I think about the oldest, which are more danger for these things, and the personal liberty of young people who don't want who are against, and I am against, and I will not be vaccinated.
Yes, but you know that Macron is just doing that for manipulation. Because
yes, of course that it is manipulation.
Strong individualistic ideas before the vaccine, and now he's supposed to be almost a socialist. And you understand that behind the scene, he is just pushing capitalist interest, and the purpose of the real left rationalist thinking people is to make people discover that the pseudo-leftist argumentation of Macron used today has to be linked with the radical right-wing reactionary Macron discourses of yesterday, because there is a logic in Macron between yesterday and today, and Macron is just functioning on amnesia. He wants people to forget what he told 1 year ago, but he's pushing the same line. So we have to show people that Macron is manipulating them. And when he uses leftist argumentation, it's just an appearance, and behind the scene, there is something else. And there is something else, because in the same time, he's pushing the law for vaccination. He's pushing also the law to cut funds for hospital. We are still having every day in France less and less beds in hospitals. We have less and less medical personnel. In the same time, he's supposed to care about public health. He's destroying behind the scene public health, And in front, he's telling people we have to take into account collective interest in the same, but in the same time, he's closing beds, as we say in France. We have, for example, the reform of the Bichat hospital, where 500 beds will be closed this year. And this is taken. At the same time, we have the reform of the employment law, which is pushed now. We have the reform of the pension law, which is taken now. So he's just using the vaccine as a screen to push to divide people between pro and anti-vaccine. So his strategy is very clear, and we have to be very clear about that. And we have to be among people to explain them what is going on, and that Macron didn't become a socialist suddenly 2 weeks ago.
Yes. In this speech, first 10 minutes was leftist in the time in the question of COVID, and after he said that we need to destroy chômage because everybody have to work. So in one conversation.
And that's why we have to be. We have to take into account. I mean, Lenin. I remember what Lenin wrote in 1916. Just before the Russian Revolution, we had the Irish Revolution. And basically, of course, the Irish Revolution was very progressive because the leader of the revolution was Connolly and socialist in Ireland and so on. But in the same time, of course, within the Irish Revolution, within the Irish movement, we had a lot of reactionary, ultra-Catholic, traditionalistic Catholics and so on, which were completely reactionaries. And of course, the British establishment at the time of the Irish Revolution said, oh, you see, these Irish people, they are revolting for reactionary things. They are not liberal. They are middle-aged people looking for a reactionary time when the Catholic Church was leading, and so on and so on. And Lenin put a letter telling that, of course, you have reactionary people taking the street in Ireland, fighting against the British imperialism, and that's normal. Because you will always have people who have mixed in their head, but who understand that the situation is unbearable, but they don't understand the reason why their situation is unbearable, but we have to support them. Because objectively, they are fighting against the system. And we have to support them and step by step to explain them that what are the logic of the system they are fighting against. And it's a very good article about that, about the Irish Revolution of 1916 by Lenin, which is very clear because what he wrote then is exactly the situation we have now.
Okay, so I propose that we finish discussion about vaccination because I have another two subjects, and no, but I think that it is shorter. Okay. Firstly, could you present the actual politic of the French government, French bourgeoisie towards Russia? Because in the time of the Yellow Vest movement, they said they used many anti-Russian propaganda, that the journalists from the RT and Sputnik, they are the spies and stuff like this. And now it was the situation with this Fillon who began. So what do you think about the relation French and
the situation? First of all, I would say that the European bourgeoisie, mainly, of course, the German bourgeoisie, but also the French bourgeoisie, is in a difficult situation because it's obvious now that the American imperialism is not able to maintain the existing system as it was during, let's say, the post-war decades. They hoped that with the end of Trump and the coming back of Biden, the situation will be back to normal. But it's not. I mean, the situation of the United States is decaying, and it's obvious that it's decaying. And you can observe in Europe, but not only in Europe. For example, if you look on other part of the world, for example, the King of Saudi Arabia, which is not our friend, is now obviously more and more looking at China, not because he's communist, but because he feels that the American help is not solid. And he wants, of course, to preserve his throne. And this situation we have also in Europe. I mean, European leaders, European bourgeoisie are discovering that the United States are not a very good policeman anymore, that they don't control the situation, that the economy of the United States is decaying, and that they have to adapt to the real situation of the world. They don't like it, but they have to adapt to it. And that's one thing. The second thing is that very basically, France, as Germany, needs gas. And it's obvious that the gas, the idea that the gas coming from United States is a complete crap, it doesn't work. In Poland, they don't want to see it, but in France, it's in Germany, it's very clear that the only gas you can have in Europe is coming from Russia. Eventually, if situation improves, it can come from Iran, and via Iran from Qatar. But what it means you have first to have good relation with Russia, at least normal relation with Russia and with Iran. And that the United States cannot accept because they fight for their hegemony. And there is a contradiction between the interest of the European bourgeoisie, and French especially, and the American imperialism. And that's the other thing. And they understand that the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, which is the fault of Polish leader, basically, because if Poland was a rationally had a rationally thinking political leaders in power, there would be no Nord Stream. The Nord Stream would go through Poland, and Poland would be the big hub, economical hub of Russian gas toward Europe, and Poland would be much richer than it is now. But Polish governments are just puppet of the American imperialism, and they work against the interest of Polish society and even against the interest of Polish bourgeoisie. And that's why you had the Nord Stream 2, which is going through the Baltic Sea. But in this situation, Germany and France, especially Germany and France, they need the Russian gas. But they need the Russian gas for their economical interest. So they had to force it against American imperialism. And that's one of the reasons of the situation concerning Russia. Second thing, if you are fighting for the unilateral hegemony of the United States, you don't want to have any other superpower in the world. You don't want to have any alternative power in the world. You don't want to have Russia, China, Iran, and so on. Because you want only to have the unipolar world you had before, after rather the end of Soviet Union. But if you are in a little bit more rationally thinking, like are the European leaders, you understand that you cannot fight against China, Russia, Iran, and other countries, Syria, and so on and so on and so on. You have to choose your enemies because you have not the force to fight all of them. And if you are a rationally thinking bourgeois, I'm not talking about proletarian, you think China is looking more and more socialist now under Xi Jinping. It was not always the case before, but Xi Jinping is rather on the left side of the political spectrum in China. He's reinforcing the public system, the planification, and the social policies. So China is definitely not the country a bourgeois would like. But Russia, why not? Russia is a pure capitalist country. So if you are rationally speaking, thinking in Paris or in Berlin, you say, the interest of the French and German bourgeoisie is not the unipolar world of the United States. It was the interest of the bourgeoisie when there was the United States were strong, and when the American policeman was leading all over the world, fighting in Iraq, fighting in Afghanistan, fighting everywhere, and supposedly winning wars. Now it's obvious that they lost the war in Iraq, they lost the war in Afghanistan, they lost a lot of wars, and they will lose more and more. So if you are rationally thinking in Paris, you say, since the United States are not so strong, we have to try to have Russia on our side. Because Russia is not a danger for capitalism. So why we would be on the side of only on the side of the American imperialism and not on the side cooperating with Russian bourgeoisie? They have money, they have gas, they are privatized. We can do business with them. Exactly like we do business with Japan, with the United States, with everybody. And the main enemy is China. So we have to take Russia on our side, because Russia is now on the side of China. Why Russia is on the side of China? For geopolitical interest, because the United States didn't accept the Russian bourgeoisie on their side when they were on the unipolar world. They refused to have these Russians to be considered as potential allies, but allies, not puppet. The Russian bourgeoisie wanted to be ally of the West, but not puppet of the West. The United States didn't accept that at that time, and that's why the Russian bourgeoisie went on the side of China. That's first thing. The second thing, of course, Russia is interested to have cooperation with China because it's very good for economical interest of Russia. But thinking from Paris or Berlin, you can have the hope. I think it's not realistic, but that's another thing. You can have the hope that basically Russia can go on the side of Europe against China. And, you will have good relation with Russia, good relation with the United States, and the whole North will be more or less integrated against the global South and against China. But not only China, but all the global South and all the national liberation movement in Africa, Latin America, and so on. So, for a lot of reason, I think that this is why, for the moment, of course it can change, but for the moment, there is a part of the Western European bourgeoisie which tend to have a more realistic approach of Russia than before, because the United States are not so strong as they were. And it's obvious that the United States are a decaying empire. It's obvious. Of course, the Americans don't want to accept it. But if you look objectively at the situation, you know that the American empire is going down, and that Biden didn't change the situation anymore. I mean, you understand that very, very clearly. So Putin begins to be, I would not say an alternative to NATO, but he could be helpful.
And what is the relation between Russia and China?
For the moment, they are very good. They are a strategical alliance, and I think that they will not change, because the Russian economy is very linked with Chinese economy. So even the Russian bourgeoisie has interests to cooperate with China, especially since the fact that the Chinese Communist Party is not pushing any political change outside its borders. I suppose that the Chinese would be very happy if the Communist Party of Russia would take power. But if they don't take power, it's good also, because they can cooperate with Putin. And especially we have to take into account that in Russia, situation is complicated, because on one side, we have let's say the strength ministries. That's what they called in Russia. It means army, secret police, and diplomacy. They are rather on the side of global South and China cooperation. But we have the economic ministries and the national banks, which are very linked with the Americans. And of course, the situation is not good for them. But still, we have a strong pro-American party within the Russian establishment. But for the moment, for objective reason, for the reason I told, the decay of the American strengths, the situation in Europe, in the Middle East, in China, everywhere, the leading force in Russia is rather in the direction of very strong cooperation with China. And I think it will prevail. Because, for example, we have the gas. Russia is of course exporting its gas to Europe, but Russia is exporting much more gas to China. And it's a big deal. We have also scientific cooperation, but what Russia is not a complete economy with all branches developing, but Russia is a scientific power, and the cooperation between scientists of Russia and China is very, very strong. So I think that all the, let's say, the intellectual establishment of Russia is rather, not always, but rather tempted to cooperate with China rather than with Western countries. But of course, if you go from Macron or Merkel's side, you will be tempted to take Russia on your side. What I think is not realistic, but I can be wrong.
Okay, so one more short question. And the position in Poland in this diplomatic relation, German, France, Russia. Where is Poland?
That's very interesting, because of course the Polish policies from the last 30 years are a complete failure. I mean, Poland was the puppet of Americans, and it was not only in favor of the United States, but it was mostly against the interest of Polish economy. As I told you, for the gas question, but for other issues, it's the same. But now it's a complete failure, because Poland now is, in fact, with bad relation with everybody. Bad relation with Russia, you understand why. Bad relation with China, because it was too pro-American. But also bad relation with France and bad relation with Germany. So, in fact, Poland has nobody to count on.
And bad relation with USA also.
And now bad relation with USA. So it's a complete failure. And in this situation, what can they do? And it's interesting, because they are trying, for economical reason, to develop good relation with China. But in the same time, for anti-communist reason, they fight politically China. And it's very difficult to be politically enemy and economically friend. especially that the United States, their main enemy is China, and they don't want Poland to have cooperation, even economical cooperation with China. So this of course, that the ideal situation would be for Poland to have good relation with China, and taking advantage of this relation to improve their relation with Russia. But because of psychological blockade in the heads of politicians, they cannot imagine to have good relation, to have normal relation with Russia. They cannot. They are completely blocked on that field. So they are in a dead end. And they will lose more and more economical, more and more economical opportunities. But in the same time, we have, or in Poland, I mean, when I'm talking about elite, I'm talking now about political elite. But fortunately for Poland, even if I'm not a capitalist and I'm not pro-capitalist, but still, you have to recognize that you have rationally thinking capitalists. And rationally thinking capitalists, for example, in the city of Łódź, which is quite important for traditional industrial reason, the city of Łódź is pushing now a policy of cooperation, of strong cooperation with China, because Łódź is quite well situated on the track between China and Western Europe. And the Łódź City Council is very, I mean, they are just rationally thinking. If you want to have a good relation with Chinese economy, you must have a good relation with Russia. Because things coming from China to Poland and later for Western Europe, they have to transit via Russia. I mean, you have just to look at the map. It's impossible to have a good economical cooperation with China, not having good, at least normal relation with Russia, because they are on the road. And so the Łódź city administration is pushing cooperation with China. So the Western European goods exported to China would transit via Łódź, and the Chinese or East Asian, but not only Chinese, East Asian goods going to Western Europe would transit by Łódź. And Łódź would be the big hub between on the east-west track. And of course, if you are a capitalist, rational capitalist, you just remember the situation of Łódź before the First World War. Of course, at that time, Poland was occupied and by Russia and so on, and it was bad, and the Tsar and so on. But the bourgeoisie of Łódź understood that, and Rosa Luxemburg worked about that. I mean, she wrote about that. That the bourgeoisie of Łódź understood that they had to look at the map. And Łódź was a leading industrial city in the 19th century, because Łódź was the center of the East-West exchanges from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. So the Łódź city administration now is just looking back at the map. They understood that the Warsaw politicians are completely crazy, anti-Polish, objectively speaking, of anti-Polish thinking of economical interest of capitalism. I'm not talking about socialism. I'm just talking about capitalism. And the Łódź city is understanding that Warsaw is crazy, but we have to take initiatives in the interest of the development of Polish industry and Polish commerce. And I hope that the rationally thinking capitalists in Poland will take the lead against the stupid, supposedly pro-capitalist, but in fact completely reactionary politicians of the actual regime and the actual government, but also of the liberal opposition. Because if you look at the liberal opposition in Poland, they are no more intelligent than the Kaczynski one. I mean, Tusk or Kaczynski, they are all the same. They are obsessed with political obsession, anti-Russian obsession, and so on. when
Social Democrat also.
and Social Democrat also. So I much prefer the Łódź city administration, which are capitalist. I mean, they are not on my side, but still, at least they have a rational thinking about what is the interest of Polish capitalism, of Polish industry, of Polish, Polish economical base. And I hope that Łódź would be leading and not Warsaw.
Okay, so we have 10 minutes left, yes?
Okay.
So could you present the leftist candidates for the election presidential?
We have the one you talked about, the Trotskyist one, Anastasia Kazib, was from a very tiny group, but which is quite important because he's a trade union leader, quite known. So
and he was active in the Yellow Vest movement.
Yeah, and he was active in the Yellow Vest movement. So maybe, I don't know, but he will maybe appear on the political scene in a much more visible manner than up to now. I'm not, of course, talking he will, but maybe. And of course, we have two leaders. I'm not talking about the Socialist Party and so on, because I don't consider they are left at all. So the two leader we have, we can talk about is Mélenchon from the unsubmitted left, this is the name of his group, and Fabien Roussel from the French Communist Party. That's the two left people that are competing for presidential election. Of course, Mélenchon is well known because he was already a very important leader at the last presidential election. From my opinion, he lost quite a lot of occasion later, and that's the reason why I think he's weaker than he was 4 years ago, actually. But we will see. And that's the reason why Fabien Roussel did manage to have his party not pushing for Mélenchon like it was the situation 4 years ago, but advocating his candidate, his as a candidate of the Communist Party. And now he's leading a political electoral campaign all over France. On my opinion, in a bit opportunistic way, because sometimes he's telling things very radical left, but sometimes not very far from the extreme right, because when he's talking about migrants or police questions, he accepts to be at manifestation with people. I would never accept to manifest with them, like Philippot, Dupont-Aignan, and so on. And he was even at a manifestation supporting police with the Ministry of Interior, Darmanin, which I cannot accept. But his way of thinking is that we have to be on the side of the people, and when people are are in the street, we have to be with them. What I can understand, but not as far as to be on the same, let's say, manifestation as openly right-wing people. But anyway, he's also a candidate. But basically, the situation on the left, I think, is not good, because a lot of people, including left-oriented people, do not believe anymore in traditional political left parties, because there should be a complete reorganization of them, and it was not done. My main hope is what is happening now within, not political party, within the trade union CGT, where there is a strong movement to change the direction and to recreate a very grassroots-oriented class trade union, which is traditionally linked with communism, and which will, if it succeeds, push CGT in a direction able CGT to force political parties to change and to rebuild a real Marxist point of view. For example, what I criticize, for example, in the Fabien Roussel political campaign, one of his main slogans is that we have to give workers more rights inside enterprises. I don't agree with that. I think we have to give workers the rights to take the enterprises. That's the political purpose. Not more rights. The power must be in the hand of the workers, and we have to. I mean, a communist should say that the communists, they fight so the workers are the masters of the enterprises. They don't want more rights inside capitalist enterprises. That's social democracy. They want the right to lead fabrics, to lead enterprise, to lead the economy. So, the Communist Party is still on a rather social democratic line, I would say. Of course, a left social democratic line, but still a social democratic line in the moment when capitalism is collapsing. And when capitalism is collapsing, you have to tell people capitalism is collapsing. We have to fight for socialism. It's the situation of the day. That's my point of view.
And they are also two Trotskys, I think. Lituvier, there are Trotskys.
Yeah, but the problem with Trotskys is that, they are... no, I know that Anastas Kazib is from working class, and I respect him for that. But the image of Trotskyism is still that, they are criticizing everything, and they are not able to take power. And this image is so strongly rooted that it will be very difficult for them to change and to convince people that Trotskyism is now a real revolutionary alternative. If they do, let them do. But I doubt it's possible because it's too people are accustomed to the idea that Trotskyists are shouting, but they never take power when they have the occasion to do that. But maybe I'm wrong. But I think that maybe Anastas Kazib will have more voices than earlier Trotskyist leaders, and I hope so, because what he's telling is quite good on a lot of questions. Not all, but on a lot of questions. But the image of Trotskyism has been for years, for decades, destroyed by the idea that the Trotskys, they criticize everything, but when at the end of the day, they never take the decision to help workers to take power.
Okay, so it is a very optimistic finish.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll. This is, I think, not the last discussion.
No, of course it's not.
Maybe there will be other candidates, and I will.
Because the most important situation can change very, very rapidly.
The most important campaign for the left is now, because I think that after there will be a campaign for the big candidates. Today is the candidates for the marginal leftist organization.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Bruno.